Hello, everyone. This is Albert from Royal Education. If you don't mind, give yourselves 1 second in order to be able to adjust the mic as necessary. I am going to be waiting a little bit more. We still seem to have participants coming in right now. So as you can, please double check to make sure your mic and your camera settings are all fine. Please do not unmute yourselves or start your cameras. That will disrupt the webinar as we're doing it right now. So if you guys don't mind, I'm going to wait a little bit more just so we can have 1 or 2 more participants come in before I begin the webinar. Okie dokie. Okay, so it seems like a few more people just came in real fast, so I'm going to get started with the webinar real quick. Okay, first things first, my name's Albert. I am one of the co-directors of Royal Education. Next to me is Brian. He's going to be helping with logistics right now. Hello. So if you guys have any questions, please feel free to add him in the chat. Please ask any questions to him. If you ask questions to me right now, my chat will probably be a little bit busy, mostly due to the fact that I'm going to be looking at the slides and working with you guys through this whole webinar. So if you guys have any questions, please direct them towards my brother inside the chat. Now, additionally, I'm just going to be going over a quick introduction. I know a decent number of the students here who are participating inside this webinar right now are probably already know me very well. So as a result, I'm only going to be offering a little bit of information about myself just to make it a little bit easier for the parents to understand. So first things first, I graduated from Harvard back in 2012. My brother graduated from Harvard as well. We have been working inside the education business for years. I personally have been working in psychology counseling for about 7. If, for example, people have any questions at all about credentials, you can look at the National Association for College Admissions Counselors to see the basic qualifications for college counseling. I have been a member for quite a decent while. Now, additionally on top of this right now, if you guys have any questions about this particular webinar or want to see a recorded version of this, we will be having this uploaded on our YouTube channel as well. You can find our YouTube channel on our website. Now, if you got, again, I must reiterate, please do not turn on your webcams or your mics. They'll be disruptive towards the webinar. Thank you very much. Now, I'm going to be moving forward. Okay, so what are we going to be doing in our webinar today? Generally, when you look at the table of contents, there's going to be a large series of different conversations that we're going to be having, starting from the beginning of the general trends about COVID-19, continuing all the way until we have our question session answer at the end. Now, very important thing, if you have any questions, do not be afraid to ask my brother in the chat. He will inform me of any questions that are relevant and pertaining to any particular slide or any particular conversation we're going to be having. If you guys have any questions, please forward them to him. And then afterwards, I'll be able to answer them either right now, immediately at the moment within the webinar, or you can have them answered within the question answering session at the end, okay? Now, for general trends when it comes to COVID-19, moving forward. Okay, so obviously in the context of what is happening with this webinar, why we have to do it as a webinar in the first place, obviously, we have to kind of understand that this is mostly revolving around COVID-19 or the novel coronavirus as we know it today. Now, as of this moment, I must first tell everybody some very important information. As of this moment, it's very difficult to determine the length of time in which the society will be impacted by COVID-19. Any preventative measures to contain it have been relatively lackluster in multiple different states in America. As a result of this, also due to the fact that the federal government as a whole has not provided a unified response, what ends up happening essentially is that even if particular states provide a decent response to COVID-19, we cannot guarantee that there will not be secondary waves. Therefore, as a result, we anticipate in the future that even if COVID-19 cases were to drop in areas immediately around us, like for example, Los Angeles and La Crescenta and La Cañada, in which most of us reside, there is a potential for a second or third wave of infections like what is currently happening in Wuhan in China. So as a result, it is actually best to predict that right now, it is probably the honest answer is that we probably will not be able to participate inside school in the following semester, nor would it be very likely that we'll be able to have tests or testing situations in the coming semester until probably around mid-2000, so 2021, or at least at the earliest, early 2021. Now, as for the vaccine, a large number of individuals have been asking people about what is happening with this vaccine. Right now, trials have come out that have been promising. However, you have to realize this: promising results does not necessarily mean an immediate response that is possible for us to be impacted as of this moment. The reason for that being is that hypothetically, even if the vaccine were to be successful, the reproduction and distribution of the vaccine at a large rate capable of being able to protect everybody as a whole will not happen until mid-2021. So even at our best state, we still have to assume that the vaccine will not be fully distributed until a later date. Therefore, as a result, COVID-19's impact on education, which, by the way, is one of the most impacted by COVID-19 as a whole, is going to occur until mid-2021. So as a result, unfortunately, it is best for everybody to assume that whatever conditions that we're currently doing right now will extend until that point. Moving on to the next. Okay, now, how does COVID-19 impact education as a whole? There's a lot of questions that we have for this. And at this point, moving on to the next slide, first things first, schools will for certain be closed for the upcoming fall semester, possibly until the upcoming spring semester. The reason for this being essentially is that schools act as a major vector for transference of the COVID-19 virus. So unfortunately, even while other businesses, maybe for example, like restaurants as we see right now, may be able to open, it is extremely unlikely that schools will reopen anytime soon. Simply due to the fact that children are the predominant asymptomatic factor, essentially, of the spread of the COVID-19 virus. They don't show symptoms. And as a result of this, what ends up happening essentially is that offering students to go into school with each other will simply allow for immediate transference and passage of the virus across a large body of asymptomatic carriers. And therefore, as a result, it is extremely unlikely that we'll be able to open up schools. Because as a result of this, what will happen is that students will become the primary factor and vector of transference, and this will impact parents, and in turn impact potentially grandparents. So as a result, it is very likely that the last group of people that will be opened up to the public will be schools. Now, how will this impact us long term? The big problem is at this point is that we anticipate that funding and efforts in all schools to create will increase as a result of the attempts to create stronger online systems to ensure that education is not disruptive. Now, here's the problem. As you and I all know at this point is that education as a whole through an online environment is not really the most efficient, nor is it the best, most optimal way to do education. But the best thing that we have to think of at this point is that at least we have this as an option. Unfortunately, the real truth of the matter is there's a large significant portion of other particular type of businesses that cannot actually function with online. So at this point, at least now that education has been transferring to an online environment, we are more likely to see tools quickly develop that essentially may increase the viability of online classroom learning. For example, the adaptability of everyone towards Zoom is a good example of this. Now, another thing that we want to talk about essentially is flattening the curve. Essentially, what ends up happening is that as of this moment, most people's models for COVID-19 have pretty much predicted that the curve will be flattened and that schools may think about the possibility of opening up in August. However, this is just tentative. The reason for that being essentially is that the vast majority of schools and administrations do want to offer plan A and plan B, and therefore plan A will obviously be what is to them the easiest way to move forward. In that case, we'll be opening up schools again. However, you have to duly realize essentially is that just because locking out a school district or LAUSD wants the possibility of being able to open up schools inside August doesn't mean they will do so if it's considered to be unsafe. Even if we do open up schools further into the future, potentially until 2021, it is very likely that students will be forced to wear masks and they will not be allowed to gather in like large classrooms like they were doing before. Additionally, on top of that, it is very likely that parents will potentially conflict with school administrations about whether or not we should reopen, as we have seen essentially in that 1 week episode in which parents were debating with the locking out a school district on when to close, which is what happened occurring in March 13th, if I remember correctly. Also, Another major impact essentially of COVID-19 has been felt by most of the students. Most students here do understand and note exactly what happened with APs. And as a result of this, there's been a massive impact on standardized testing as a whole, both to the College Board and the ACT Test Administration, as a result essentially of COVID-19's causing it so that people cannot meet publicly. Considering the fact that SAT and ACT and AP tests as a whole generally tend to bring a significant portion of students into a smaller classroom setting, it is what we predict to be very unlikely that public testing as a whole will essentially be happening until mid-2021 at earliest. Mostly due to the fact that COVID-19 will pass through asymptomatic carriers very quickly. Another thing that we must also mention, ACT and College Board have reiterated again and again that they are trying to essentially create online testing situations, and additionally that they wish to be able to do offline testing as soon as possible. Realize this, it is to their advantage to say again and again that they want to be able to get offline. Do not believe it when they say that they'll want to do it offline anytime in the recent months, August, June, July, September, October. These things are incredibly unlikely. Okay, so then moving on to the next slide. Okay, SAT, ACT, SAT subject tests. So moving on. Okay, now what's happening with the SAT? So I'm going to be specifying both the SAT, ACT, College Board as a whole. When it comes down to SAT and ACT or SAT2 subject tests at this point, the College Board has recently announced that exams will be conducted online in the months of August, September, October, November, and December until further notice. This is a detraction compared to ACT. ACT has still not announced whether or not essentially that they're going to be going online as of May 23rd. They did announce that as of May 26th, they'll be announcing further changes to the test at this point. So as a result, I would recommend that people please look up the ACT at May 26th for further information. However, personally, I believe that it's very likely that the ACT will have to go online and at least admit that publicly very, very soon. As for this August, September, October, November, and December, I must iterate this to everybody. This is not an ideal situation. The vast majority of students who are currently juniors right now, they have to come to a realization that unfortunately, it is very likely that if they have not completed certain tests, whether it's ACT or SAT, they will probably have to take this test online, and that they will have very little or to no options whatsoever to be able to take this test in an offline environment. However, a large number of parents have asked me whether or not they should take the test at all. The reason why students should take this test is simply due to the fact of what we call admissions data. Admissions officers essentially need as much data as they possibly can get on students and their academic achievements. If, for example, you do take advantage of the fact that SAT, ACT, and SAT2 subject tests have gone online, and essentially these college admissions officers have said that they are going test optional. If you take advantage of this fact and essentially not submit SAT or ACT scores, this means that what information you have given them at this point weighs more. In this case, that means your grades, and that means your extracurricular activities, that means your college recommendation letters, and that means also, for example, any or all essays that you submit to them. However, another thing that you have to understand at this point is the fact that as a result of COVID-19 and its impact on the second semester of students' grades at this point, grades have become incredibly inflated. Now, we're not debating whether or not that was the appropriate action or not. That was actually the appropriate action due to the stress of general society at this particular moment due to COVID-19. However, you have to realize that that also means that that data point, essentially that second semester that students have been submitting up to this point, is relatively not useful. So, in light of the fact that they have less information than ever before, in light of the fact that tests have become optional, whatever information you give to them becomes more and more important. If you, for example, already recognize that, that means that if you do not submit a subject SAT2 and do not submit an SAT or SAT at all, what ends up happening essentially is that what little information you give them, which is your college, your high school teacher recommendation letters and your essays at this point, is going to weigh more than anything else at this point. Additionally, on top of that, we'll be talking more about the general impacts of how the COVID-19 essential situation has caused impacts on extracurricular activities at a later point. So I'll be talking about that at that point. But as of right now, the best thing to think about at this point is understand that SAT2s will probably have to be taken in August. And in the context of SAT2s in August, they are probably only in one shot. The reason for that being essentially is that at least for SAT2 US history, biology, and chemistry, students who are going to be taking them have already taken the AP test as of last week. Taking it last week means that up until August, they're going to have to retain that information. It's incredibly unlikely that students taking SAT2s at that point will be able to retain the information until past August, because by that point, they're going to be having to go to school. So you have pretty much one shot at this. And I highly recommend that any student that's thinking about taking the SAT2 subject test, whether in US history, biology, or chemistry, or math, assume that your August test is your one shot. As for SAT, and as for SAT for sophomores versus SATs for juniors, I will tell you this. For the juniors, you only have one option. Taking the SAT and ACT in online will probably be your only way to move forward. As for sophomores, there's going to be a little bit of a debate whether or not you should take this at this point or take it moving into the future. And we can discuss this at a later point during a general Q&A if people are interested about this. Now, another very important piece of information that has come out as of 2 days ago. The University of California has formally announced, essentially, that they are going completely or trying to transition completely away from the SAT and ACT. Now, duly realize that this does not mean that as of this year, they're not going to be taking the SAT or ACT test. In reality, what they're going to be doing is a gradual peel back. What does that mean? First part, for current juniors and current sophomores who are going to be rising seniors and rising juniors respectively, the UC system is going to be going test optional. This means you still have to submit SATs or ACTs if you have them and if you believe that they're advantageous to you. We emphasize again, it is very likely still to your benefit to submit those scores if you have them. As for students who are currently freshmen or students who are going to be current 8th graders or 7th graders, one of the things that we are currently listening to right now is whether or not the UC system as a whole is going to transition into a test of its own. We do not have any information about that right now, and the UC system is only just beginning the process of the test creation at this point. Whether or not this test is going to be considered a new standard is up to question. We do not know how that is going to be impacted and how we're going to be moving forward with that. However, as more information comes out, we will have further webinars or further seminars discussing about the impact of the UC test as a whole on the testing system and the ecosystem. So now transitioning into private universities. One of the more confusing things about what is happening with COVID-19 right now for current juniors and current sophomores. One of the bigger problems essentially is the fact is that every single school has a different response. Certain schools are incredibly and significantly responding well to the crisis as of this moment and providing positive and clear information and instruction to all the students. Other schools, not so much. A big problem with this right now is that some schools have gone test optional while not clarifying what that means. Other schools have gone test blind, which means essentially that they will not actually see the scores even if you do submit them. Some schools are still requiring it. Other schools who have gone test optional are not telling students that despite going test optional, their financial aid still requires SAT or ACT scores as a result, essentially, of rules involving their endowments. So, considering what's going on right now, we still recommend that students will always develop or participate in SAT and ACT exams if they absolutely can, and submit those scores to at least qualify for financial aid in all cases, rather than worrying about whether or not having not submitted or submitted the scores, they will not be viable for financial aid. Additionally, on top of that, there's also scholastic aid. Significant portions of the schools do not talk about whether or not they have gone test optional for scholastic aid and whether or not in terms of scholastic aid, it impacts the viability of being able to get that aid. So unfortunately, again, we say right now, due to the fact of lack of information coming from all the private schools and the fact that every individual private school is acting differently in response to COVID-19, we just have to assume that the best way to proceed forward is assume the worst case scenario, which is that the school still requires SATs, ACTs, or SAT2s, and that at least as far as we can, provide scores just to at least pass the minimum threshold. Moving on to the next one. Now, advanced placement exams. I'm sure the vast majority of students are abundantly aware of what's happened with the AP test at this point. So moving onwards. Now, What happened in the past week? The best way we can describe the AP exam and how it proceeded this past 2 weeks essentially was that it was a very big mess. In that the lack of information on part of the College Board, the last minute nature essentially of their testing environment, the lack of accommodations for students in terms of being able to provide them the information required to be able to double check that the servers would be stable, the lack of information involving what is happening involving data or how they're going to be collecting this whole situation, the panic that occurred as a result of students not being able to submit, server instability issues, internet issues, variability and difficulty in exam. There's tons of problems that happened as a result of the AP exam this year. So what can be done to be able to address some of the problems immediately? Number one, right now, as of this particular moment, we have to tell people ahead in advance. The AP exam is going to have an incredibly large variability in terms of results. It is extremely unlikely that students are going to be getting the same kind of scores they'll be getting in previous years. Mostly due to the fact that if you think about what's happening right now, is that students have gone in vast differences in terms of variable difficulty as a result of it being one question. Certain students got incredibly easy ones. Certain students got incredibly hard ones. And as a result of this, we don't even know if a curve has been implied on this. So as a result, the College Board is keeping relatively mum about exactly what's been happening. And they've also done a very poor job in communicating exactly how many students have been actually able to properly submit. So until we get more further information, we recommend that most people just do what they can in light of the lack of information and do their absolute best to just accommodate for what's been happening so far. Additionally, as a result of how messy the AP exam was, how does this reflect on the SAT and the ACT? Unfortunately, as a result of what's happened so far, we pretty much predict that the SAT and the ACT are pretty much going to have the same problems. Due to the fact that many students have variable internet connections, due to the fact that many students may not be able to listen to the instructions correctly or upload data incorrectly, we predict that it's very likely that students are going to have very, very similar issues. Additionally, another major problem is going to come into play. At this point, considering that most SATs and ACTs have all been done via multiple choice exams, we predict that the College Board is going to be very particularly stressed out about issues of cheating. Multiple choice exams allow for ease of cheating. And as a result, we don't know whether or not the College Board is going to implement particularly invasive measures in an attempt to stop students from cheating, whether that is by implementing webcam features or mics or figuring out things via social media, as they claim that they're doing right now in terms of APs. We don't know exactly what they're going to be doing for SATs. As of this moment, until we hear more information, we'll just keep everyone posted about that. So, change online. What is the design like moving forward? So, first things first, we anticipate that the online exam will probably try to imitate the GRE as best as it can. Now, if people don't know what the GRE essentially is a graduate records exam. It's the exam that people have to take for attempting to enter into a master's or PhD program. And essentially at this point, this means that exams will have passages and questions that will be scrambled and of variable difficulty to prevent cheating. Timers will log the exam once the section is over. And essentially the questions and the systems will be in place for the students to flag any question they're uncertain about. Now, the GRE has also been experimenting with the potential for online proctors. And whether or not the SAT is going to be implementing those features, we have no idea. That being said though, why is this possible versus not possible? Considering that the GRE is a massive exam that is used by schools all over the world, we predict that at least some parts of it will be attempted to be implemented by the SAT. Now, what's one of the big differences between the GRE and, let's say, for example, a standardized SAT test that is usually designed for high school students? One of the bigger problems essentially is the fact is that GRE exams are targeted towards postgraduate students. As a result, by nature of that, the students are one, less likely to cheat, and two, also a much smaller pool and therefore easier to control. An SAT exam, which is taken by pretty much every major high school student that's attempting to go into college, is going to have a much bigger audience. Also, high school students are generally more likely to cheat than a postgrad student. Therefore, as a result, it's possible that the SAT will attempt to implement significantly invasive procedures in order to try to prevent cheating. What those features will be, we have no idea as of yet. We will have to see. Okay, now, the more important part that we want to talk about with everybody at this point, college applications. How essentially COVID-19 has impacted college application procedures as a whole. This is going to be the relatively longer part where I'm going to be talking about this. Now, bear with me essentially, and please, if there's any questions, please forward them towards Brian. By the way, Brian, is there any questions at this point?
Not at the moment.
Not at the moment? Okay, good. So we're going to be moving forward. So when it comes down to each individual part, and if you have any questions, please break it down. Number one, extracurricular activities. As many parents have stressfully noted, extracurricular activities have been taking a massive hit as a result of COVID-19. Number one, the number of summer programs that were converted to online-based summer programs and internships have pretty much been none. The vast majority of summer programs have completely delayed or canceled their programs rather than attempt to implement online features in a desperate attempt to continue to do things moving forward. So as a result, the general average ability for students to participate in summer programs has completely dropped to a very, very minimum level. Also, a number of students have completely converted to to either doing work or volunteer services, remote, online, all these kind of conditions. Now, first things first, I must emphasize with everybody, colleges understand that COVID-19 has directly impacted students' ability to participate in programs. That means essentially, even if you're not able to do one, it is not a death sentence towards your college application. Please understand that. That being said though, does that mean doing one means even more than before? Also, yes. Therefore, however, before we all even think about moving into all these different potential opportunities or thinking about extracurricular activities as a whole, the first thing we must emphasize, please, safety first. I must reiterate this again and again. Safety is paramount. Schools do not approve of students acting out in a way that compromises their own health or compromise the health of others. If you, for example, as a student, proceed to do something recklessly in an attempt to look like a hero and then proceed to potentially risk the lives of your family, I will tell you this immediately. Colleges do not see unsafe actions as anything advantageous towards them or advantageous in their affirmation of what they think about what you're going to be able to accomplish. The reason for that being essentially is very simple. College students live with each other. The vast majority of them all live with each other. If you are willing to act recklessly and compromise the health of other people that live with you, that could potentially lead to massive outbreaks throughout the school. And as an incredibly poor reflection of your character as a person. Therefore, as a result, we will say this again. Anything you do must be done in a safe manner. Even if you do go outside, you must proceed to be safe. And I'm talking about when I say safe, I mean absolutely safe. Wearing masks and gloves is not going to be enough to make most colleges think that you're safe. Staying 6 feet away and doing things, potentially, maybe they'll be more inclined towards accepting that. However, if you do anything, please, for the absolute love of God, stay safe. Now, as for the potential for extracurricular activities as a whole and what kind of opportunities are available, I'll be 100% honest with everybody. When it comes down to volunteer services and other opportunities, they're going to be limited. When it comes down to being able to act and help people, you must offer as much communication as you potentially can. Efficiency is going to be dropped out the window. The vast majority of people, the only way they can communicate with everyone else would be through phone calls or video conference measures or webinars like we're doing right now. Therefore, as a result of this, whatever measures you have to do to deliver things must be done through, either personal delivery, but, left in the front door, or other potential measures, including staying as far away from people as potentially possible, and communicating with everyone through email and phone. So therefore, as a result, if there are any online options for volunteer services that you may see, I recommend those first and foremost before anything else, rather than attempting to do anything physically and in person. Now, expectations. One of the things that we must talk about essentially is the general expectations of colleges towards students. First things first, colleges will absolutely have to change how they review student applicants. This is very important. When I say change, I mean drastic changes. For example, as I previously mentioned before, grades in the last semester were appropriately inflated due to efforts on part of schools and teachers to reduce societal stress during COVID-19. However, that means that grades during the spring 2020 semester are not adequate to determine students' performance. This means essentially that as a result of the lack of ability to determine academic performance from those grades, that means that letters of recommendation are going to become top priority. I iterate this again. This means essentially that students must weigh heavily towards the letters of recommendation. The reason for that being essentially is that schools cannot tell which students are going to be great or bad or contemplative or innovative or school leaders or any of that matter from your grades. Instead, the only thing they will have to get a general gauge of your academic ability will be your letters of recommendation coming from major teachers that you work with. Therefore, as a result, even in the event that you're doing everything online, I have to tell this to all the students, you must serve as perfectly good students underneath an online environment. If you proceed to be lackadaisical, turning in homework assignments late, participating in classrooms with minimal participation, entering a classroom and then literally just leaving an avatar where you actually do nothing, and then proceed to not answer any questions throughout the entire time period for your junior year or your sophomore year, in this case for many students, I am just telling you, you're going to regret that. And the teachers always remember. At this point, more than any time than ever, you must participate in your online courses to the absolute best of your ability. This is very important because those teachers will remember which students did their best despite circumstances involving COVID-19. And those teachers will do their absolute best to reiterate that inside your letters of recommendation. If, as a student, you barely participate and have done nothing this last semester in terms of affirming that you're a top quality student, you have made a critical error in judgment at that particular moment. Many students I've heard have been participating inside classrooms, just barely turning on the camera, not actually participating inside class and playing video games while the teachers have been doing things. I am telling you, teachers may act as though they're ignorant, but they know, and they learn, and they remember. Therefore, as a result, I am telling you right now, if you have made those mistakes this semester, next semester, you better not do them again. Extra important part, extracurricular activities. We understand essentially that a large number of students' extracurricular activities have pretty much been frozen as a result of COVID-19. Competitions for sports athletes, games generally for athletes, large meetings for major convention type activities, volunteer services for clubs like Key Club, major activities for large groups, debates in general, all of them have essentially been frozen. Therefore, as a result of this, we are asking students to do their best to still participate in activities that they've been doing up to this point. However, it is also very important that just simply sitting there and not doing anything else will reflect badly. Therefore, as a result, we still tell students right now that whatever you can to help your community, whatever you can to in order to change things or understand or make things better, you have to do those measures. And therefore, as a result, even while you may be speech and debate club president or JSA chapter president or a captain of your athletic team, everybody knows that you're not really doing much at this point. And the schools know that you're not going to be doing much during COVID-19 because they know from everyone else that essentially nothing is happening. So if you just sit on those accomplishments and do nothing afterwards, we warn you, that's not going to play in your favor. Additional on top of that, test scores. You have to realize this, and I apologize to people that this is not advantageous to. If you have top test scores before COVID-19 and you're currently a junior, it is very likely you have at least a small advantage. And the reason for that being essentially is that those test scores are indicative of your capability before this incident occurred, and therefore as a result, before any potential online test grading inflation that may result as a result of cheating or, for example, open notes factors or other things. Therefore, as a result, if you have one already, I am telling you, you probably have an advantage. Now, as for the students that have not completed all their tests up to this point, and we're talking about current juniors who may not have finished their SAT or ACT, it's not that you're going to be at a massive disadvantage. It is just that it's still important that you at least try to get the test scores and at least prove to these schools that you're able to do it in a particular environment. Additionally, advanced placement scores before COVID-19 will also help schools place your ability as a college applicant. and therefore as a result may play a part in whether or not they still accept your college credit later. Additional very important factor that I'm going to be talking about with everybody else is the fact is that there's a high possibility that your AP test scores will not allow you to immediately get college credit. A large number of private schools so far have affirmed the idea that you won't get college credit for getting a 5 or 4 on the AP Advanced Placement exam. What they do tell you, however, is that they will attempt to test you afterwards to see if your qualification is up to a certain point. Therefore, as a result, we don't know whether or not this is really viable, considering that telling a person to test for AP Bio 2 years after they've done it is really unviable. So we expect that this might only apply to calculus or other math-based type APs, but so far we'll keep people updated as we go. Now, another part that we want to emphasize to everybody, with such shaky data points as shaky SAT and ACTs and shaky SAT2s and grades being inflated and all these other factors and extracurricular activities being changed or completely dropped or rendered relatively useless as a result of what's happening so far, this means that the two major parts besides the letter of recommendation, which is also the major part, is going to be your essays. This might be the 1 year where essays may literally make or break a student. And what you write and how you write inside your essays may determine whether or not you get into the school at all. And we must say again and again, students must be honest when it comes to their essays. Is that going to be next? Yeah. So, essays. Going into this whole thing. Now, as I reiterated, because grades have been inflated, now we have to realize this. When it came down to grades as a whole, originally grades on a scale of 10, most educators have indicated that grades matter to a factor of 9 out of 10 involving their decisions of whether or not they accept students. That unfortunately is going to be dropped down to as far and low as a 6. Now, essays used to sit around a 6 or 7, depending on the college admissions officer. Now, every single college admissions officers have very, very different factors on how they believe about whether or not students can get into particular schools or not. So the philosophies are not universal. If anything, they're simply an indicator of a trend and not necessarily an indicator of how any unified response is particular schools. Additionally, on top of that, there are many, many different schools who have completely different admission deans who serve as the heads of their individual admissions offices, and that as a result may have different philosophies as a whole. However, and a very important trend so far was that grades used to matter a significant portion of whether or not you got into a school or not. At this point, because of inflation, that's not necessarily the case. Therefore, as a result, essays are going to matter, and essays are going to be the key factor that you have control over, because so many things have been rendered relatively uncontrollable, because so many things have disappeared, because all these other factors that we used to be able to control have all gone out the window. What's left? Your essays. And because of this, every admissions officer is going to do their absolute best to try to determine whether or not a student is worthy of admissions from their essays. And this is very important. During times of crisis, what a student does or what a student has to cope with during these times will dramatically sway whether or not a student is going to be accepted to a college. We're not saying that every student has to somehow be a hero and change everything. If they are struggling with financial problems, or if they're struggling with an unstable home environment, or if they're struggling with personal issues, right? You must iterate that you're struggling, because explaining that struggle will dramatically change how an admissions officer perceives your performance so far than to simply hide it and then just talk about nice and sunny things. Additionally, if you are from a relatively wealthy family or you're from a higher upper socioeconomic class, you cannot have some sob story about how you struggle, because as a result, the schools are just going to simply just toss you by, because they will understand from your tax returns, because you're going to be submitting them for your FAFSAs, that essentially any attempt to lie about your struggle so far is simply just going to be thrown out to deaf ears. However, if you are from an upper socioeconomic class, you need to show that you are willing to do things for your community. And that's where a really, really very important factor is going to come into play. Telling an unfiltered truth about your experience, whether you struggled or whether or not you did amazing things for your community, is going to play a huge part. And essentially, if you are able to do amazing things during this time period, like donate masks or work with people or participate in general responses to COVID-19, raise awareness, work on businesses, or even do side hustles in order to be able to help your family. Those factors, all these things are going to play a part in how the college is going to perceive you. Therefore, as a result, what we say again and again, your essays are going to matter more now than ever. Now, at this point, we're going to be moving into the question answering session, and I'm going to be participating and talking to people overall as a whole to ask if there's any questions overall. Please, at this point, if you feel free, you could chat. My recommendation at this point, if you don't know, the chat box should be at the bottom of the page, essentially on here on the bottom, or if you're doing on iPad, it could be at the top. If you don't see the chat, it's probably inside the more factor. If you see 3 dots, it says more. You could click on there and essentially go into the chat box, and you'd be able to either chat to me or my brother. We'll be able to answer your questions immediately.
So I'm gonna go ahead and get started. There are a few questions that were posted before, but because of the slides, I had to sort of wait out a little bit. But I'm gonna go ahead and ask some questions. So the first question that was asked was particularly about the idea that does a student need to create some sort of famous project, organization, or discovery that gets into the news to have a chance to be accepted to an Ivy League school?
At this point, obviously that will help. So I'm going to be completely honest with everybody as much as I possibly can. Having your name come out in the news for doing good work for people will play a huge part in getting you into an Ivy League school, mostly because that's what many Ivy Leagues look for. Now, are we saying that everyone needs to be able to accomplish to get to an Ivy League school? That's completely impractical. Otherwise, the newsfeed will be constantly filled with future Ivy League students doing everything they can to save people's lives during COVID-19. That's not what's happening right now. We're just constantly staying inundated with news about what's happening with COVID-19 as a whole. So at this particular moment, no, you don't need to create a massive organization or do all these kind of things to get into an Ivy League school. However, what do you need to do? Number one, even in lively circumstances, your GPA will matter. If you get a B or a C during this time period, it will hurt you more than in other time periods. We're just giving you the heads up on this time. So if you can't get straight A's, please get straight A's. Number two, the other factor that we want to say, you still need to try to get good scores, because that's still going to play a part. Now, like I said before, it's going to play a lesser part than before, but that does not mean it doesn't play a part. Additionally, on top of that, what you do, how innovative you are, will play a huge role in whether or not the schools will accept you. So your essays, your letters of recommendation will play a part. Now, this is a very important factor that we keep telling the students. You need to make people aware of your work. If you did amazing things and no one knows about it, it doesn't help you. So we're not telling people to show off to the news or do things like this. But if you're working with a teacher on a project to get things and help people, that teacher should be the one talking about you in their letter of recommendation. Or if you didn't have a teacher work with you, you need to mention it inside your extracurricular activities or preferably in your essay as well. So as a result, what you do and how impactful it is towards the community will play a part in whether or not you get into a top tier school. As to whether or not this will have as much an impact in UCs or other public institutions, we have to see, essentially, because at this point, everything has been unprecedented. We don't know the impact of everything so far because the schools themselves don't know. Most of the admissions officers, I'll be completely honest, don't even know what's happening at this point, and the vast majority of them feel very lost as much as you do. So considering that situation, is there any concrete answer to your question about whether or not, essentially, you need to create a massive organization to be able to get into a top tier school? The answer is no, but how much of a no, we have to see.
All right, the next question. The question is, will helping the community in a small way affect your placement position or your spot in the college admissions process?
Yes. This is one thing that we keep telling to everybody. Doing things for the community during a time period of crisis is one of the largest factors that will make most schools think that you're a good leader. Even if it is small, as long as they're aware of it, that makes a difference, right? Now, we're not telling people just to volunteer and risk your lives. Again, like I said before, safety first. However, that being said, volunteering and helping people that are in desperate need of help during a time period of crisis is a massive part of what schools are looking for. If you selfishly stayed inside your home, or at least selfishly did nothing for everybody and just played video games all summer or something like that, I'm just telling you, that's not going to reflect well on you. If you spend the whole entire time that you had this summer doing absolutely nothing, essentially, schools will see that, because many times schools will ask you what you did over the summer. Many times, even right now, the college Common App, essentially, which is the most common app for most private schools at this point, has a 250-word portion where they're asking you what has happened to you or what have you done during the middle of this crisis. If you leave that empty, and none of your activities list show any effort on part of helping the people and community as a whole, they will see that, especially if, for example, you're a person of upper socioeconomic status. If your family is capable and your FAFSA shows that your family has actually done well during COVID-19, they will ask you, why didn't you do anything? Why didn't you help people that needed help? Now, very important note, if your family is struggling financially, that is something that you need to talk about, because as a result, obviously during that time period, you're going to have less resources. You're not going to be able to participate in things. You're not going to have the time or mental energy to be able to do these kind of things. If that is the case, no one will blame you. These schools will understand, because as long as you write that into place and talk to people about that, guaranteed they will understand. They have explicitly mentioned that essentially they understand that people experiencing financial hardship will be given concessions during this time period.
Okay, the next question. So because of the current pandemic that's happening right now, does it depend on the school district's determination to open like summer schools, the fall and future semesters? So what he means particularly is that it doesn't depend on certain coronavirus cases in different counties and places to affect school administration decision to open the school programs.
That's a good question. Now, at this point, what you have to understand essentially is that generally whether or not school is open or closed will almost always be determined by your local school district. Overall, if something becomes very, very serious and the state government, which is currently headed by the California governor at this point, determines that all schools must be closed, that will override any attempt by the district in order to reopen. However, duly note, the vast majority of state governments generally try not to tread on the toes of municipal, which is municipal city governments essentially at this point. And city governments generally don't like trying to tread on the toes of local government as a whole. So in the event that a school attempts to reopen, you do have ways to attempt to address that. So if you are uncomfortable with entering into the campus, at that point, it's down to the parents to discuss with the school administrations to see whether or not opening is really viable. And if enough people complain or talk against it, I guarantee you that the vast majority of schools will probably stay away from a reopening. We say this again, however, most schools will not reopen. The only schools that even have a potential reopening at this point are probably privatized institutions, so private schools in general. Those private schools will determine on a case-by-case basis whether they can reopen. Now, whether or not that will actually occur, or whether or not the schools themselves will be allowed to reopen by the municipal government is another question we have to answer at that point. However, private institutions can determine on their own whether or not they want to. Public schools will be based off of the unified school districts. Just important note, if for in case of follow-up question on that one, you have to realize this: whether you feel safe or not, at that point, if you feel unsafe about going to school, one, you must clearly state that to your school via email and communication. And number two, do not go to school if you feel unsafe about it. That's because it's incredibly reckless for any school to attempt to open up and have students come in during a time period like this where people's lives are at risk.
And that's all the questions.
Okay, so if anyone has any additional questions, please, feel free to put them into the chat. I am here right now in order to be able to discuss with people. Just duly know and realize, essentially, if you have any further questions after our webinar, please don't be afraid to look up on our website. As you can see right now, we are on royaled.net. Essentially, additional on top of that, we have our Facebook, we have our YouTube channel, we also have an Instagram, and we have Twitter. If you have any questions, don't be afraid to hit us up on any of these particular types of social media. You can also just email us directly if you ever want to see that. You will have our emails as alberto@royaled.net. Also, my brother will be briano@royaled.net. So if you have any questions at all, please feel free to ask us. Now, is there any additional question at all? No? Okay. So do you want to end it a little bit? Okay, so thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate everyone coming in as guests right now. We understand that this time period is going to be a little bit crazy, and everyone else understands there's a lot of questions at this point. Actually, 1 second. There's one question right now. Let me finish this real fast. So what are some ways we can volunteer? Now, this is coming from Aiden. Thank you, Aiden. Now, first point that we must emphasize. The ways that people can volunteer will vary dramatically depending on where you are. Additionally, on top of that, it will depend on which groups you're comfortable working with. Now, in terms of volunteering or doing everything in general, one thing that we always recommend is simply look and research and reach out. There's tons of opportunities. They may not be apparently available on the websites, but if you see a group or organization that you really admire and you want to be able to participate or work with them, we highly recommend you give them a call. If a call doesn't work, give them an email. If the email doesn't work, look for another organization and move forward, or follow up on those organizations that you just called and emailed. Because at this point, essentially, everybody is working from home. So a lot of the traditional means of communication have either become disrupted or essentially are delayed. So as a result, do not become discouraged if by emailing organization you don't happen to get an immediate response. Simply move onwards and find other organizations and do as much research as you can to your local community. Additionally, on top of that, if it's not local and you can't find any opportunities locally, we highly recommend that you work and reach out to further opportunities and nonprofit organizations in the greater city of Los Angeles as a whole. So in that kind of situation, if you have any way to find an organization that you particularly like, simply reach out. And we highly recommend this. There's other opportunities that we may be able to work out with people, but generally overall as a whole, we try to help students find these opportunities as a whole as college counseling. So in college counseling, what opportunities you should look for will probably be affected by your major as a whole. Now, during the normal time periods, this will be a dramatic part of how exactly we'll look up volunteer services and work with students. So if a student, for example, wants to go into medicine, we have students work in hospitals or work in public health sectors or do these kind of things. Now, considering that everything has been reduced significantly as a result of COVID-19, that might not be the case anymore and might be subject to a lot of debate. But at this particular moment, we're offering as best as what we can in order to help everybody.
All right, there's one more question. Is there anything academically for the general public and for like middle school students that can do? What can they do during the quarantine?
Okay, so what can they do during quarantine? So younger students, it's going to be a little bit difficult. The vast majority of organizations at this point are trying to juggle online services for the vast majority of people and are already kind of struggling trying to deal with high school students as a whole. So if a student is a middle school student, is it really vital for them to participate inside extracurricular activities? I'll tell you this right now, it is probably not. Unfortunately, there's a few factors to why I say this. Number one, the reason for that being essentially is that a middle school student is very unlikely to be able to participate in extracurricular activity at the same level, essentially, as a high school student. Also, additionally, on top of that, any middle school activity that you have been doing so far essentially will not be able to be recorded in a high school setting. However, there is one exception to this rule. If in the event that you are participating in a program that extends past middle school and into high school, you can refer to that within your extracurricular activities. Therefore, as a result, if you do want to find opportunities, do think about the long term and think about whether or not you can participate in this 4 years down the line. And if you're able to participate in a way that offers a meaningful experience for your child. Right now, due to the fact that it's a stressful experience, telling a middle school student to try to juggle online services and participate with adults at that level is incredibly difficult. Most middle school students struggle doing it in person already at this point. So we don't recommend middle school students to frivolously think about moving forward with extracurricular activities without moving and thinking about the long-term possibilities of it. However, high school students, we do say, do your absolute best to try to achieve something. And do your absolute best to reach out and help your community as much as you possibly can.
Another question: if you have if you have bad test scores before the COVID-19, would that hurt my chances significantly during the college admissions process?
So when it comes down to colleges in general, one of the things that we always emphasize the idea is progression. And one of the things that we always talk about with students is the idea that in terms of progression, if you show essentially that you've been improving, it will always help. Now, am I telling you that it probably might hurt you more now than it did before? Possibly. We don't know anything yet. We do know, for example, that a lot of schools are making accommodations for students considering COVID-19 is happening so far. So it could be that they're going to be much more lenient than they were before. We don't know because most of the college admissions officers themselves don't know. What I can tell you, however, is that whatever you do at this point, this means that from now on, any test scores that you can take right now will mean more because of what has happened so far to you before COVID-19. So if there's any online testing or anything you've done so far that essentially is relatively negative, do your absolute best to try to at least make up for it by doing better in the future tests that you've taken so far. That's the best thing we can do at this point. Trying to worry about what you've already accomplished so far or whether or not they are currently going to impact you further in the future is not really going to help you. So we still recommend that the best thing you can do at this point is just move forward and try your best with what you can at this point. Any other questions?
Nope, no questions.
Okay, any other questions? before I continue onwards? Nothing else? Okay, good. Awesome. So at this point, I've covered a decent number of questions. Again, like I said before, just because I closed the webinar doesn't mean that we're not open to questions or going to be helping you or doing anything like that. If you have any questions at all, feel free to email us at our emails. Feel free to contact us via our website or our Facebook or YouTube or Instagram or Twitter. And essentially, thank you so much for coming in. We really appreciate your time. We really understand that during this time period, there's so many things going on that are causing so much chaos, for example. And please understand essentially that during this time period, we're doing our best to help everybody. And during this time period, please reach out, help each other, do absolutely in order to become better humans as a whole. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. Bye-bye.